Hi, everyone. Brianna with another installment of our Insider Perspective interview series. We are proud to be built by nurses for nurses here at Nurse Tech, and we aim to provide a collaborative social space where nurses across all levels can come together, share their stories, and share any resources and guides, along with camaraderie, humor, work life, sanity savers, and the like. Today, we are joined by Dr. Tarua Barr. Dr. Barr has spent most of her career as an academic nurse scientist, one who is internationally recognized in stroke and the immune system. After suffering a PE in 2013, she left academia in 2015 to launch Valtteri Bio, as well as Deep Roots Healing, an LLC. And she has since spent the last 5 years as a nurse entrepreneur business coach. Dr. Barr is also an integrative nurse coach, a certified yoga instructor, holistic health advocate, and educator, and very impressive to myself, who I am also a mom of 4. She homeschools her 4 kids. You officially are my hero. You have one of the best quotes on your LinkedIn, which we will we'll add for people to follow at the bottom, about how it can take a turn. You said, "I have learned that sometimes what seems to be a detour in your career can lead to your biggest success." And I know for a lot of nurses watching and reading the transcript here, they're at the crossroads in their career. So I love using that as a jumping off point and hearing more about your story. So welcome. Thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here, and I love what you all are doing at Nurse Grid. So any way I can support it, and just share my story and inspire and encourage someone else. That's why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, tell us. Let's start at the beginning. What got you start in nursing, and what drives you now?
Yeah. So I like to say that I was a nurse long before I actually knew I was a nurse.
Yeah.
I've just always been fascinated by the body and how it worked, and particularly the brain. I mean, just how we think and how we act, and just fascinated me. And I had a really awesome biology teacher who kind of shifted me to think about nursing. I was thinking about biology, and he saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and he said, "I think you would be a fantastic nurse." And so I remember thinking, that's interesting. I had no one in my family that was a nurse. And I started looking, and sure enough, I mean, right then and there, I knew. I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. I love people. I love to talk to people. Like, that's really important for me, is connection and conversation. And I was fascinated with just like how the body worked and physiology. And so combining the two of them is really what led me to nursing. And so I started my career really in neurotrauma. I love the fast pace and the complexity of it. I'm a very curious person. And so I was always asking questions and trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why is this not happening? And a mentor of mine said, you've got this mindset for science and research. You should consider a PhD. I had planned on becoming a nurse practitioner, opening my own clinic and kind of doing that thing. But she kind of, gently pushed me down this path that has been an amazing path for me, one that I never planned for myself. And, just over time, that path turned into another path, and I kind of followed opportunities as they came up, and I followed my interest. And I've had an amazing career in nursing. So, I look at where I started and where I am now. I can't even believe that I've done half the things I've done. It was never in the plan. I laugh and joke about that, but I'm like a serious planner. But I've completely flipped that on its head, because everything I have done was not in the plan. So I think that's just a word of encouragement for anyone who might be listening, to recognize that sometimes the plan does change, and beautiful things can come out of a change in plan if you embrace that and you look for that silver lining. And as long as you're always aligning who you are with what you do and what you really feel called to do, you're in the right place.
Yes, I love that. I really like what you said about following your curiosity, because I think in nursing, especially now, the pace can get so fast, and we get so task oriented if we're for a bedside nurse. But I know a lot of nurses are questioning, what else could maybe be out there for me. So I think a piece of advice for nurses is to follow your curiosity and see what excites you about your patients and what you want to learn more about. I love that.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to that now that you brought that up. It's curiosity, and it's also just being confident in yourself, because often when we're in situations, we tend to box ourselves in. We tend to think this is what I can do, as opposed to taking those blinders off and just kind of opening up to the possibility and things you never even imagined. When I started Valtteri Bio, I never imagined I would start a company. I actually almost said no to that, because it was completely out of my wheelhouse, and I'm so glad I said yes. So curiosity and confidence, just being confident in yourself and following that intuitive feeling, kind of that gut feeling that you have.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to our first day on the job, where we just are so out of our comfort zones, but you see so many people zipping around that are doing what you want to do, and you'll get there. Just being able to capture that feeling again and say, like, even though I am a dialysis nurse, I could also be this other kind of nurse too, because I did it once before.
That's right.
That's awesome. Right. Tell us now, you do so many different things. You wear so many different hats. What are you most passionate about?
For me, it's about inspiring and encouraging my fellow nurses. So I'm a deeply spiritual and intuitive person. And for many years, I kept that part of me out of my work. Particularly in academia, it was just kind of not as valued, right? So when I had my health scare, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, but that really helped me to just regain my perspective. And so what I chose to do with that is to then kind of put all of my personal and professional experience into this package. And essentially what I had to do was to rebuild everything from a place of alignment, knowing who I am and what I'm really here to do, and aligning with that every single day is how I got back on my feet. And so now I'm really passionate about helping others create this life of alignment for both their personal and their professional life, and really, create joy and peace from those spaces. So most of what I do now is I work with nurses and clinicians who kind of have this inkling that there's something more out there. They might not be using their skill set to the best of their ability, or maybe they feel like they're kind of stuck in their current role, or they're questioning, something new might be out there. So I help them to create this new path, whether it's a career shift or a new business. It's really creating this from a place of alignment.
I love that. I've written about too for nurses that, like, every nurse has this one thing about them that they bring so much to their, and I really truly believe that. So I love that you just said that, just on a personal note. You mentioned the health event that you went through. Can you talk a little bit more about that? It was a major, potentially life-ending health event.
Oh, yeah. So it was very traumatic for me. So I was 12 weeks pregnant.
Oh my
God. I had 3 other children at home. I was on the tenure track in academia. I was running ragged, just running. And I had a blood clot, a pulmonary embolism. And I woke up and, I'm coughing up blood, and just super traumatic. And then I went through this period of complication after complication. I had an MI. I started bleeding in my lungs. All the while I had this little baby boy growing inside of me, 12 weeks.
Yeah, right at the point where you're like, we made it.
Right at the point. Exactly. And so, when I look back on that experience, what happened was that the trauma nurse in me kind of came out, and I went into survival mode. Like, it was just like, okay, this is how we have to do this. I didn't process anything. It was just like, let's get through this.
Yeah.
And then by the grace of God, I did deliver a beautiful baby boy that September. Wow. And he is now 8 years old. I can't believe that.
Wow.
But after that, I had to go through cardiac rehab because I couldn't walk up my steps without getting out of breath. I mean, I was told, I had a very good friend in the emergency room, the ER physician, who said, Tara, first of all, your clot was huge. And had it launched a centimeter to the left, your heart would not have been able to take it. And so he's like, you gotta like figure out what you're going to do with your life. Like, you were running yourself ragged, And so I'm going through cardiac rehab, and then it just hits me. And, the fear, the panic, the depression, like just the whole experience hit me. And I went through about a year where I just tried to, regain myself physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And when I came out of that, I recognized that the way I was working was contributed to this event. Yeah. I was not taking care of myself. I was a nurse who had no idea how to take care of herself.
Right.
So that led me down this path of just completely transforming what I did and how I did it. And it took me about a little over a year. And I did end up leaving the position I was in because it was such an unhealthy environment. And I realized that everything I was doing on my end individually was great. But then when I went back into this environment, it was like, oh, this is, I can't fix this environment right now. I gotta fix it. And I've got to work on fixing me first before I can ever go back to an environment like that. So I left, and, I still have my moments where I'm reminded of that event, even though I'm now, so many years out. It's still, it'll be 10 years, in 2023. There's still fear. There's still, but the panic. I can experience all of those emotions again, and it's a great reminder for me that life is really short. And if you're not doing what you feel that you are called to do, and you're burning yourself out and you're draining yourself out, it was a huge wake-up call for me. And I now like to share this with others because I don't want people to get to that point that I was, where it literally took me 2 years to get back on my feet.
Wow.
The whole domain. So I don't want that to happen to you or anyone. It's like, this is like your wake-up call. Take a hard look at what you're doing. And if it's burning you out and, physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, it might be time to shift or change.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a incredible story. And I'm sure I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like, I mean, obviously I know you survived, but I'm just thinking, like, you have this small baby, and when you said you couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs, and you got all the hormones of,
it was super intense. I guess I'm still in the process of writing my book. It's still kind of traumatic for me to even write it, but I did write. I was a co-author in a book years ago where I did share that experience in more depth and detail. And we could talk the whole time about that, just what I learned and what I experienced and what I went through. But it really was, you have these events in your life where you look back, and that's one of them for me, where it's like, that was a crossroads. That was a serious crossroads for me.
A serious, I would say. Wow. Talk to us a little bit about what it means to be an academic nurse scientist. I think people sometimes do these titles and they're like, that's pretty badass. Like, how do I do that? So how did you, like, what does it take to be that? And what does your day-to-day life look like when you were in that role, when you're primarily in that role?
Yeah. So, academic nurse scientist is all about asking questions, curiosity, wanting to improve something, whether that's a condition or a treatment path or a program or whatever. My path to academic nurse scientist was an RN to PhD. like a
Okay.
BSN to PhD program.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of an accelerated track. At the time, it was a newer thing when I went through it. Now it's fairly common if, academia is where you ultimately want to land. RN to PhD is a great option. And as a scientist, I mean, you're a scientist, right? So you're asking questions, you're really digging in, you find an area that really fascinates you, and you study it and you study it and you study it, and you identify where that gap is in that literature. And then your role as a nurse scientist is to try to fill that gap. So for me, when I was active in that role, I loved the intersection between the brain and the immune system. It fascinated me. And I wanted to understand more about how the immune system could impact the brain, particularly after a traumatic event like a stroke or head injury. And so we did multiple studies, multiple trials, because there's still a lot that we don't know about the interaction between the brain and the immune system. So when I was, really thinking about the path that I wanted to go down, I knew that it was going to be this combination between like psychosocial and like physiological, kind of this combination of how does the physiology, because remember, I'm like, love the body and how it works in the physiology. That's what brought me to nursing. How does this physiology impact the psychology, the well-being, kind of, how this person is in the world? And that's what all of my research was when I was in academia. So, I had grants, multiple grants at one point, large research teams, did a lot of teaching as an academic nurse scientist. And, your job is really to create new science. That's what you're doing.
That's very cool. I don't think I've heard of a direct connection between brain and immune system. I mean, other than just what I would think about, of course, if you're stressed and cortisol and all that, but we hear so much now about the gut-brain axis and how like your gut is your second brain. And so that's fascinating. Makes me curious to learn more about it.
Well, I'll tell you, when I first started this work, and I'm not that old, but when I first started this work, it was in 2006. And, the literature was really interesting, and I was kind of going down this path. And I remember telling my mentor, my dissertation mentor, I want to study how the peripheral immune system impacts recovery from stroke.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, all right, you're either really onto something here or you're absolutely crazy. Because at the time, the brain was considered an immune privileged organ.
Yeah, right.
It no longer is. We know it's right, especially because of what you're learning. Yeah. So it's not, the science is very young. We have so much. We're just at the cusp of this interaction between the brain and the immune system. And interestingly, we're seeing a lot of it in this post-COVID syndrome. A lot of it right now. I think we're going to learn a lot more.
Yeah. Incredible. So cool. Talk to us a little bit about Valtteri Bio, the companies you started, and also Deep Roots Healing, the mission and what your purpose is there.
Yeah, so Valtteri, our goal is to bring to market a point of care blood test that measures this immune response to stroke so that we can, one, quantify that, yes, somebody has had a stroke, because believe it or not, we still aren't really good at doing that.
Right.
And two, can this immune system pattern tell us a little bit about how this person is recovering or potentially could recover from that event? Yeah. So everything we've done so far in Valtteri has really confirmed that there are these really interesting patterns in the immune system that can tell us whether or not someone's had a stroke and how well they're going to recover from that. Wow, because the immune system is so important in brain health. Amazing. So our goal in Valtteri is to do that. Right before COVID hit, we landed a large pharma partner that I am so thankful for, because now in the post-COVID world, a lot has changed for diagnostics. If you're not doing COVID, I mean, the money has literally dried up. So I praise God that we landed that partnership before COVID, because, it's been incredibly hard to raise money in the diagnostic space, but we're doing it. It's an up and down thing. We could talk all day about that one too. So that's where we are in Valtteri. When I started, my role in Valtteri was Chief Science Officer. And I now still serve in Chief Science Officer role. I'm also a board member. But I have more of a backseat role from the day-to-day stuff. We have a team that's really managing a lot of the day-to-day stuff. So I'm thankful for that, and just hopeful that in this next year, we have some trials that are going on right now, that those trials, everything looks good and we can just keep going. So Valtteri was kind of my passion project as a scientist. And when I decided to leave academia, I left to build Valtteri. I remember having the conversation with my husband, who, by the way, was very nervous about that. He's not really an entrepreneur. We had small kids, and remember, I had this really serious life event.
Yeah, right.
And 2 years later, I'm like, I want to start a company and I want to leave my job.
Yeah.
And so, I had people asking me, like, are you crazy? Are you okay?
Right.
Are you sure you're
less stress?
Right. Like, I've never been better. Things are so clear to me now. So, I just left my academic work altogether. It was not easy to do that, but I was leaving to build something I was really passionate about. And so it was definitely the right decision. And then at about the same time that I built Valtteri, I also built Deep Roots Healing. And for the first 3 years of Deep Roots Healing, it was for my healing. It was a website and it was a blog, and I shared my journey. I just shared what was on my heart. And it was a great way for me to get some of these really big emotions out and to process them. And then I noticed that when I was out at conferences, I was telling people about the work I was doing in Valtteri, but then I was also saying, I had this really big event and this is how I've transformed my life. And so I noticed that I was getting some clients coming in asking for help and support.
Right.
And so Deep Roots really grew into what it is today, which is holistic health, healing. I do a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring, a lot of kind of holistic health guidance, herbal medicine, all of the stuff that I got into personally. Yeah. And how I really transformed my life, I now share with others. Yeah. And that's what Deep Roots has become.
That's what is just standing out to me so much from what you said in the beginning about being in academia and having this side of yourself kind of poo-pooed and you just don't talk about it. And you wonder do other people like privately feel this and we just all agree not to talk about it ever. And then having this platform can say like, ta-da, and having it attract people. I just think that's so cool. And it's such a unique marriage of the two. And I imagine that it's, very popular because I think a lot of people feel it. You just, your one track or your other track, and they often don't mix. So
that's right. That's right. I mean, so many people right now are seeking, they're heart seeking. And we've been trying to find this, we're trying to fill this void with things, right? And what Deep Roots is all about is, for me, it's alignment with who I am spiritually and a close relationship with God. I really rediscovered my relationship with God. And I felt comfortable talking about it again because I had been for so long not allowed to even talk about it, So when you have an event like that, and, for me, I was able to get through a lot of that because of my relationship with God. Yeah. And I'm not allowed to talk about that in academia. How do I even talk about it? I mean, I can't even talk about it. It's like, okay, so why did you decide to start a company? Well, I can't leave it out. It's just who I am now. So, and I guarantee there are a lot of folks that are listening that feel that way, and you might be feeling stifled spiritually. And that's definitely a sign that it's time to just, follow that path. Rediscover that path, nurture that relationship. Yeah. And, take one step in front of the other. Exactly. I don't know if you've heard Brene Brown on any of her recent podcasts promoting her new work. She's talking so much about language and we need words to describe what we're doing. How else are we ever going to, connect with one another? And that's what you're
your story reminds me of, is being able to really name what you're feeling and what you're going through in order to communicate with who you're working with. It's just great. I saw a meme right before I came on here. And as a fellow yogi, I thought you'd get a kick out of it. It said, today's yoga pose is the downward spiral.
Oh gosh.
Just depressing and funny. We'll stick with the funny side.
Haven't we all been there?
But if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts for current working conditions. And I'm not trying to put too much of a spin on it from that, but a lot of nurses are struggling and feeling like they're in a downward spiral in their careers. Think about, what wellness plays into that role and pull yourself up.
Absolutely. So, from my perspective, and many of my clients and I talk about this, I see a lot of lip service to wellness, not a lot of real stuff happening. And if your solution as an organization is to provide a yoga class or meditation or coaching, where a nurse has to do that on her own time and has to find time to go out and do this, that is not a solution, in my opinion. Placing all of the burden on the nurse to take care of themselves is not a solution, right? So organizationally, there are just mammoth things that need to happen. As a matter of fact, I do have a client right now. We talk a lot about this because, the role that he's in is he's really kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's doing a lot of work personally on himself. But then he goes back into this environment every day where they're understaffed. So he's got a huge caseload. The patients are more critical. The rest of the staff and faculty are also kind of burnt out. And so there's not a lot of camaraderie and support for one another. It's an incredibly toxic environment. And yet he feels so connected to being a nurse that the thought of leaving is causing so much anxiety and strain. So it's like, I'm not comfortable. I know this is not good for me. I know this environment is not good for me, but I can't even begin to think of what I would do next because my identity is so wrapped up into this. So, my encouragement for anyone that might be, this might be resonating, is to really take a step back and redefine your identity outside of nursing. Better understand who you are. Who are you authentically in your core? What are your gifts? What are your skills? What are you talented at? What fills your soul? What do you enjoy doing? And how could you be doing that? And really just, no judgment, no expectations. Ask yourself, okay, what could I be doing and how could I be doing that? I don't like to tell people to leave their jobs. That's never normally my go-to. So, I like to try to figure out, okay, how do we keep you where you are and help you to flourish and thrive in your position? But what I'm seeing, unfortunately, is that in so many situations in healthcare right now, our hands are tied behind our back. There is not much we can do to change the environment. And so, you got to ask yourself, what's more important to you? Is it your well-being? Is it your health? Or is it staying in this role that is not good for you, is very toxic? It doesn't mean if you leave, you can't come back, right? So I wish I had an answer, but I don't know what the path forward is for healthcare right now, particularly, staffing and we have got to completely shift the model on its head. And what I like to remind my clients about is that healthcare is a business. It's a business. It is about making money, regardless of whether or not, yes, we want patient outcomes to improve. Yes, we want to take care of our clinicians, but the bottom line is driven by money. So money is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. However, that's what's driving these healthcare organizations. So if they're not making money, then there's a problem. They've got to figure out how to make money. So that's very out of alignment with why most people become a
Exactly.
nurse.
Oh my God. Everything you're saying, I'm like,
So,
quick
you
to
know,
come
so
to your
you're
family, but the house you live in is for profit. And so
got
you're
it.
right. It doesn't connect.
It does not connect. So what you value is not
Yeah.
ultimately what your organization values. And so that's where the disconnect is coming from.
Yes.
And, you know, so there's that kind of at its base. And then on a much higher level, in terms of our profession, we have really got to think about how nursing services can be reimbursed.
Yeah.
We are a commodity. We are not a resource. We're a line item in the budget. Yeah. And that has to change if we want organizations to take our health and well-being seriously.
Yes.
And the way that we change that is by voicing our concerns, you know, standing up, being part of groups, you know, like your state coalition groups, to change some of this. Because otherwise, I'm not so convinced that the environment's going to change until we are seen equal to physicians and others.
Exactly.
Not as a line item in the budget.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think a lot of nurses are coming to that reckoning, as are health institutions now, with all the talk of capping travel nurse pay. And I think it's going to spark some really interesting and painful depending on what side you're on. But I want to go back to something you said, which I never have thought about it this way. It's like a paradigm shift, and I'm listening to you as you're talking, but I'm also like, God, that is just so simple. But what you said about how, and I think so many nurses can relate to this, putting the wellness on the nurse as opposed to putting the burden of responsibility on the institution itself. Because as we're so used to that, like, oh, now you're going to be the one that documents this. If housekeeping can't come, you clean. We always just like take it on, you know. And wellness seems to be such a personal, you know, responsibility. But really, it's genius to have the institution, you know. Anyway, you hear what I'm saying. But I just love that you framed it that way, and to like take something off our plate, but like, hey, this yoga class is going to be built into your 12 hours today, and here's this portion's going to be covered, and we're going to push you off the floor. I mean, a lot of that is like utopia hospital land, but amazing would that be is if we ever slide to like a less crisis point of this pandemic, a way to build back nurses and to build back their trust into where they're working.
That's right. I mean, this is huge. Okay, so this is where I'm moving. Okay, because what we've been doing at Ohio State. So for the last 2 years, I was entrepreneur in residence at Ohio State in the College of Nursing, and what the evidence suggests is that when we take care of our nurses and we take care of our people, they're more productive and they're more innovative. They're more creative. So intuitive, right? This makes perfect sense.
Every nurse is going to be like,
if you're well, you're going to do a good job, for goodness sakes. You know, this is not like brain surgery here. So, so the problem organizationally, however, is almost what you just said. You know, okay, that's like utopia hospital over here, but actually, no, it's not. It's what we know works. If you look at like Google, right? You look at these systems outside of healthcare, ideation rates are higher in institutions where they take care of their people.
Right.
So, you know, people are more productive, they're more creative when their well-being is taken care of, and vice versa. Yeah. If you give people the opportunity to be innovative and create and think outside of the box, well-being and satisfaction rise. Right. So there is this bi-directional relationship between innovation and well-being that we aren't really thinking about using in healthcare. So, so what I've been doing is I've created a fellowship program. It's called the Innovation for Wellbeing Fellowship Program.
Very cool.
I am now a consultant. I left Ohio State to do this full time. I'm now contracting back with Ohio State to keep this fellowship program going.
Cool.
But the idea is that, you know, it's an organizational shift to create a culture that supports innovation and well-being. And then it's an individual shift that prioritizes well-being and innovation and being creative and curious.
Right.
So when those two things come together from an organizational standpoint and an individual standpoint, that's when things really begin to take off, because you can't expect it if it's just coming from one side or the other.
Right.
And so in healthcare, the hope is that someday this fellowship is seen as of value to a healthcare institution. We're creating the evidence. We have a paper that's about ready to go out. There's some more, we're launching another year of this. And, the goal is really just to show that when we take time to support the development of innovation competence and confidence, and we also nurture well-being, really awesome things happen. And
I love it.
That's the goal. That's where I'm moving. That's where I'm taking all of my experience personally and professionally and putting it into this work.
It's so awesome. To a little bit, I do this forever, but I'm going to move us along. A little bit about a lot of nurses that are curious about other roles. A thing that comes up, and I think it's on, we see a lot of it on social media, and you're like, do you actually have any clients, or is anybody actually becoming a follower of yours, and what value are they getting out of it? But the whole idea of the nurse coach or the health coach or the nurse entrepreneur, which is a very umbrella term, but if you want to help others be better versions of themselves as you do, what tips do you have for nurses that are curious about that?
Yeah, so nurse coaching, we are literally at the cusp of this. Just the beginning. So recently, we now have an exploratory code where we can be reimbursed. It's not quite there yet, but this is a huge change, because eventually, if we want nursing services to be reimbursed, these are the kinds of things we need to do.
Right. So
we do have a CPT experimental code. I forget what it's actually called. But in the next few years, that will turn in with evidence that will turn into a reimbursable code. So then at that point, we will be able to reimburse for nurse coaching services, which is huge. We already are coaches as nurses. We don't realize. I like to say coaching is kind of what you think of when you see a coach on the ball field. The idea of a coach is to bring out the best in another person. It's to help them see what they might not see in themselves. They've got some blind spots. It's to gently hold them accountable to their goals. It's not to condole or, it is to be that kind of gentle, supportive guide, and to take the journey hand in hand with your client. I love coaching. It is so aligned with who I am.
I could tell you would be an amazing.
I love it. I mean, when I tell my clients, you got to find something that fills your soul. For me, it's sitting down, having a brainstorming session with someone, encouraging them. When I see these light bulbs go off and they say, I never thought about that before. That's when I'm like, I'm in my element there. It's like, yes, this is where I want you to start thinking. Think transformatively. That's what I do as a coach. And so, the question of, do I actually have clients? It's hard to get clients. I'm going to be completely honest. It is not an easy thing. And, the biggest challenge I've had is just letting people know that I exist. Right. Like many people don't know that I even exist. And so I can't get clients if I'm not visible. COVID has made it really hard, because I was doing some travel. I live in a really small rural town, which does not help at all. So, even if I get out into my little small rural town, my population of interest is really small. My ideal client here is really small. So, my first recommendation is, if you love the idea of coaching, Integrative Nurse Coach Academy was where I went through my training and did my certification. They are amazing. So really think about certification, credibility, and that reimbursement is why you want it. And then secondly, to take a hard look of, where are you in terms of geography and niche? Okay, that means, like, who do you want to serve?
Yeah.
Is there a market for that in your general like physical area? Okay. If there isn't a market geography wise, then you got to start getting really savvy on social media. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, start one now. Just start it. LinkedIn is a conversation. That's all it is. It's about engagement. So if you want people to engage with you, you have to engage with them. It's a conversation. It's about getting visible in order to get clients. And then the last part that really I've had a challenge with, because I want to serve a lot of people, but it's really important to get very specific and clear about who your client is, because you have to be able to talk directly to them.
Sure.
So you don't have to serve everyone. You are serving a very specific need, and when you're able to clearly articulate that, that's when the light bulbs go off for people. And there could be 10 people sitting in the room, but one of them is like, she's my coach. I need to talk to her.
Right.
That's what it's about. You don't want all 10 people in the room. You want that one person who's like, I am ready to do this. Like, where do I sign up?
Right. Yeah.
So that's my feedback. When I look at the really successful nurse coaches, they've done all those things really well. And I would say, like, I'm kind of in between there. I haven't quite figured out the social media thing, to be honest.
Yeah. It's
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
But, geography wise, like I said, I live in a really small town, so I can't get out and do workshops, seminars. I'm not getting clients from my geography.
Right.
I'm about an hour and a half from a large city. So, it has its pros and cons. So most of what I do is completely online. So it's trying to rise above the noise, which can be really hard.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good, and I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the conversation about really speaking out, and then the people that need to hear it will pop up and their ears will prick up. They'll be like, wait, what did you just say? And those are your, which will best serve you also professionally. So I love that full circle. I have one final question about community, and at Nurse Tech, we're huge on community and providing a space that nurses can just come and don't have to give, backstory before people get, oh, I know why you're here. Like, people just get it. We know what we're going through. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of community, in your own life or, virtual or belly to belly, and how it can help nurses going forward right now?
Absolutely. So we were designed to be in community with each other. That's who we are as human beings. So when we aren't, we can't really thrive. I mean, in order to thrive, there's something called the blue zones. It's a study that was done historically. If you're not familiar with it, it's really fascinating. You should check it out. But it's the idea of longevity. How do we live to be old and healthy, not just old? And a primary theme is this idea of community and connection to one another. So our default, though, as humans, is when we're feeling really bad and yucky, we want to try to isolate ourselves. Yes. We want to try to disconnect. I'm speaking from experience here. So, your default isn't necessarily there to support you. It's coming from this really primal place. So particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're stressed and you're burnout, connecting with others who are going through that experience is so important, because when somebody understands because they've been there, then they can support you in ways that other people just can't, who have never experienced that. So, staying connected to people who've been there, and in particularly in safe environments where you can share really how you're feeling without judgment and without shame or guilt, whatever that might be. So community is a really big thing. Whenever any of my clients that are going through my programs, we also have group calls every month. So anybody who's a client of mine gets access to these group conversations. And what I find is of most value in these group conversations is that two people will meet for the first time and they start talking, they've got a mutual interest, and they're like, hey, let's talk after this call. And then they start making a relationship outside of the group call. And it's really what it's all about, because I really believe that we are here to bless others. And sometimes in our suffering and our challenge, we are given certain experiences that we can then turn into blessings for others.